Hello everyone, I'm just getting the recording equipment together there. Here we all are, and there I was, all those years ago, on a 760 bus from Leeds to Keighley, trying to learn the Bornless one from a photocopy I'd taken from the appendices of Crowley's Magic. In those days I'd left it a bit late, in those days I had a terrific memory. I was to be the invoking priest, and we were using the Bornless one as a consciousness-raising working, as a preliminary to the main parts of the evening's work. The ritual known as Chaos Mass B, Chaos Mass Baphomet, which is the nearest thing the IOT had ever had to an official ritual, didn't yet exist. This was the first IOT group in Britain I'm talking about. Now, it was possible to get from Leeds to East Morecambe, where Ray Sherwin lived, by getting on the 93 bus near the university into town, then an intermediate step, and then the 666 bus. Ray often encouraged raw first-time visitors with no local knowledge to do so. For obvious Kabbalistic reasons, I'll get the 93 man, then the 666. Even though there were much easier ways to get there, one of which was the 760 bus, which I was taking. I'm looking at the kind of steaming jungle of magical ideas that the IOT arose out of in the late 70s, early 80s here. So, talking about where it was first announced, Ray Sherwin had started his magical life with Thelema, and the name of his magazine, New Equinox, which ran from 1976 to about 1979, shows that. For the first 2 years, New Equinox consisted of serialised Crowley reprints with some truly terrible artwork, relieved only by many photos of a nice-looking young woman demonstrating the signs of the Greys with no clothes on. This was the 1970s. They must have thought, that works well, let's do it again. Let's dig down and find the most obscure Grey signs nobody's ever heard of. So that was the next issue. In 1978, Pete Carroll became a regular contributor to the New Equinox, often writing in through his world travels, sometimes under the flag of the Psychonaut Institute. Here's a contents page listing an article from those days. There we are, where is it? The Way of the CDs by Pete Carroll. Before going travelling, Pete had lived in London, where he'd been involved with what was effectively the immediate precursor of the IOT, the Stoke Newington Sorcerers, which he described as, quote, occultists of various backgrounds and subsequent directions worked in this loose multidisciplinary group in the mid-70s. End quote. I don't have to do his voice anymore. The SNS included Charlie Brewster, who unfortunately died recently, and Gerald's sister, who died a few years back. Charlie left his mark on the IOT with notoriously extreme rituals and some extraordinary ideas, which were wildly successful for a while, but seemed to fall prey to self-sabotage, as is the case with a lot of erratic geniuses. One of these was the idea of making loads of money from commodity trading, employing algorithms derived from a blend of chaos mathematics and astrological considerations. Charlie didn't write down his early experiences until much later, in 1991, when he wrote this book. So the early records we're talking about here, the stuff of New Equinox, kind of thing, stuff Pete was writing, they're records of groups of people who wanted to practice magic. Magic which had a fairly thermic flavour, no disagreement with do what thou wilt, but away from the deadening hand of the OTO. I remember someone back in those days commenting that they'd been to an OTO meeting and, quote, all they do is take drugs and read the book of the law, end quote. So people like the SNS and people like the groups that we're gathering now around Pete Carroll's ideas decided to dispense with the reading part and actually try out some real magic. The style of New Equinox got feistier with some piss takes of the magical scene and those who made a living from it, like this advert, Secret of the Universe. I mean, the piss takes get more and more personal. You can guess who some of the people they're referring to here. The first announcement of the formation of the IOT was in the New Equinox in May 1978. spiritual heirs to the Zoskia cultus, the illuminates of Thyatira are drinkers of the dual ecstasies of the sex and death gnosis. The IOT represents a fusion of thelemic magic, tantra, the sorceries of Zos and Tao. The non-mysteries of symbolic systems have been discarded in favour of the mastery of technique. Studies may be accomplished in a minimum period of 6 months and consist of a series of techniques to be mastered by lone effort. Students will then be tested. So, having shown themselves acceptable, initiates will be put in contact with other members of the order and more complex instructions will be given. Applicants should write to care of Box 333, Morton Press, East Morton, Keighley, Yorkshire, including a blank £1 postal order with a complete studentship curriculum and instructions. Sure, £1 for all that. Fantastic. From the postal order. Here's another advert. Both of these were designed by a guy called Andrew David. Exactly the same text there. Loved his stuff. I met him via Ray Sherwin in a pub a few years after all this, and he'd been tragically, he got this arthritis in his hands and had to stop drawing. Anyway, I was in my mid-20s at the time, and it was just what I'd been looking for. I found a copy of Liber Null, which they're announcing, releasing at some point, in the same second-hand bookshop I bought back copies of New Equinox in, bookshop opposite the university. I had numbered copy number 23, though I later learned the numbering was whimsical. Leeds was a very good place for this to happen. One of the things that made it the centre of the chaos magic world in the 80s was the presence of the Sorcerer's Apprentice occult supply shop, a dark emporium, fragrant with heavy incenses, on a back street in a disreputable part of the town. Run by Chris Gray, it was a peculiar hybrid. On the one hand, the best magical bookshop you've ever seen, beautiful incenses and impressive artefacts. In fact, any of you that have been to the Boscastle Witchcraft Museum might have noticed a load of fine magical implements sold by the Sorcerer's Apprentice in there. I made one of their goetic wands. The other side of the essay reminded one of the tacky fancy goods shop. The essay was good for chaos magic in the early days and published a couple of the early chaos magic books. Here's a cover of Psychonaut, it's still a separate book. Pete Carroll's Liber Null came out in 1978. It was my first contact with the full-on chaos magic way of thinking. The cover, which I'm afraid I don't have a picture of, my copy got stolen many years ago and I couldn't find one online, was in itself the kind of thing I'd never seen before. It's very similar to the advert. It's very similar to that advert, yeah, without the text, obviously. It was the work was done by Andrew David, and here, just lost something there. Here's a montage of Andrew David's work with some spare stuff that's done by a friend. As for the contents of Liber Null, to employ a popular phrase of that era, they blew my mind. The way my mind was, before it was blown on that occasion, was an odd mixture of science and magic. It's what I'll go into now as a background to my magical gnosis. Maybe you can remember a time in childhood when you had a naive belief in magic. I remember vividly the moment when I lost that innocence, the first time I abandoned magical thinking. I was around 4, and my dad asked me what I wanted for my birthday. I replied, a magic wand. A real one, like Sooty's got. One that can do real magic. Responsibly, my dad told me that magic didn't exist. But there were no real magic wands in the real world. I recall the moment precisely. We were facing a row of shops on a mundane street in the West London suburb I grew up in. At that point, something big happened inside me, and sometime after that I decided to study science. Maybe because I got the impression that would fulfill my thirst to understand the power behind how the world works. Through my teens, the suspicion grew on me that the world as it's presented is not the full picture, that the worldview that came with the physical sciences was built on the sacrifice of vital insights and questions about people's inner worlds There was a phrase going around in the trippy 60s which summed up nicely this bit of wisdom: reality is a rip-off. I went on to take a science degree, and towards the end of my undergraduate years I started to look into the philosophy underpinning science and realised it was far more flimsy than I previously assumed. Science was in fact hanging over an abyss of ignorance. I began to look at other ways of apprehending reality. I took up some basic magical practices, guided meditations, body energy visualizations, and so forth, studying to explore what the mind could do. Finally, in my mid-20s, I gravitated to magic as my primary approach to life, and it was Lieber Null that enabled that more than any other input, at least from books. Lieber Null was a revelation. Here was an attitude to the mysteries that did not reject the things science had discovered about how the material world works, but neither did it approach that world with the dull prison planet mentality of scientism. And Tao and Zos, it all sounded so romantic. It's the romance of magic that captures us. It has to be the romance of magic that captures us. I'd gone along to an occult group at Leeds University Students' Union, and through that network I met Ray Sherwin. I was one of the two founder members of the Leeds University Union Occult Society, but that's another story for another time. The same year, he published the Book of Results, a small booklet that told you how to use Austin Spare type sigils to do spells. It was instrumental in getting people interested in actual magical experiments without a rigid theoretical framework. So those two books, Lieber Null and the Book of Results, were the first to deal explicitly with the methods and approaches that later became known as chaos magic, but not for another couple of years. Look again at that advert. No mention of chaos magic. This term did not appear even in the first 1978 white cover edition of Lieber Null by Morgan Press, Ray Sherwin's publishing venture. It did, however, appear in the second red cover edition, 1981, also published under the Morgan Press imprint, and different appendices to the white one, including an introduction to the chaosphere and the beginning of the idea of chaos magic. Obviously, chaos magic didn't emerge from nowhere. In all editions of Lieber Null, there is a chart showing the streams of ideas and traditions that culminate in the IOT. The ancestors of chaos magic, if you like. Lionel Snell's first two books also acted as precursors of the chaos magic IoT code. These were both published by the Mouse That Spins, SSOTBME in 1974, so that's before. My personal introduction to the IoT came through the Sorcerer's Apprentice coffee mornings. The SA at that time had two shop premises, one of them tiny and old, and this was opened on Saturday mornings. I lived about 10 minutes walk away, so I was a regular attendee. We sat around the sides of a tiny room with blacked out shop windows, drinking instant coffee. In tone, it was a cross between a morning soiree and an occult zoo. Some interesting people came through there. Richard Bartle Bertelli, the Magus of Dewsbury, regularly held forth with tales of wisdom from his decades of magical experience. There was a pair of young guys from Batley who spoke of their visions, so we called them the Batley Visionary Society. Chaos magic seemed to be perceived as a threat by some people. There was a pilot called Mike Jameson who came to the SA coffee mornings. He wrote a book about how to give yourself a magical enema. I remember him and his friend taking the piss out of chaos rituals, saying, "This is a chaos banishing. Chaos, arsehole buggery." Which I think we can confidently assert tells us more about those two gentlemen than it does about magic. So that's where I first met Pete Carroll. He'd come back from his world travels, in the course of which he founded the first IoT temple, the Church of Chaos in Sydney, Australia, with one Frata Vaitan. Pete referred to it as the IoT in style, and it ran for about 6 months in 1980, leaving no succession. Pete moved to East Moreton, the village where Ray Sherwin lived. The Yorkshire group, at the early working of which I was on my way to on that 760 bus, was the next IoT group and the first in the British Isles. The group started in 1980 and ran until early 82. The work we did in that group gave Ray Sherwin the ideas for the cardinal rites of chaos. The group held its first working on November the 22nd, 1980. The membership of the group was variable, with a core of Pete Carroll, myself and a couple of others, and other people sometimes recruited at the SA coffee mornings. The group closed at a rite on Beltane 1982, when a copper pantacle for the future development of the IOT was buried in the woods. This pantacle was dedicated to the female influence in the IOT. We'd worked out that one thing that kept women away from magical orders was the tired old Masonic structures of most of them, so we determined to find a new direction. That group overall only met about 5 or 6 times in the 18 months of its existence. It was an early stage of the IOT, the first IOT group in the UK, and the first experiment in a new approach to group magic. It gave rise indirectly to some of the first group magical workings that Pete Carroll wrote. For instance, it was clear that non-denominational magical groups such as ours needed a robust, generic consciousness-raising ritual, what we'd used the Bornless one for previously, and Pete came up with Chaos Mass Baphomet, Chaos Mass B, published in Equinox when it was still a separate book. Right, so again. Just going to wet my whistle. Okay, the illustration of that book was one Brian Ward, another artist whose work appeared all over the place in the early days of Chaos Magic books. He was from Leeds, but he's not been cited for a long time now. Here's another of his illustrations from Psychonauts. I'm really fond of that one. Yeah, it's beautiful. Chaos Mass B has weathered the years well. It's probably one of the few rituals, another being the Gnostic Pentagram, that's been used more than once in the IOT. We generally tend to have a disposable attitude to rituals. You write one on a specific occasion, why use it again? Here's a sound version I made of it some while back. Just going to run a minute of this so this will show this is long after it's originally composed. Made this in the late 90s, I think. It's just layered voice that's been distorted by stretching it to different speeds. So it's a very robust ritual, all sorts of things with it. After 1982, Pete Carroll went to live in Bristol and founded an IOT temple there known as Cabal Heraclitus. The only meeting of theirs I ever went to was a public event on Yule 1984 with the band Mark Stewart and the Mafia, and it ended in a fight. I remember Pete grabbing the mic and shouting, "The manifestation of chaos is at an end!" Which didn't stop these two geezers slugging each other in the face in the front of the stage, but it pulled out of any magical responsibility on the part of the magicians on stage, which was nice. Meanwhile, we got on with our own magical work. Ray returned from his stay in Egypt, and a new group started to form. We did a photo shoot in the woods above East Morton. Here's our priestess as Baphomet. And here's a bunch of us looking dodgy. We're wearing masks that Pete had made from fiberglass. They're extremely uncomfortable to wear. They brought some people out in sores. They produced a startling anonymity, which lent power to the magical work. We called them the Anon masks. The next IOT group, which is the second Yorkshire one, began in 1984. It had definitely benefited from that pantacle working of 2 years before. We had more or less equal numbers of men and women. Ray Sherwin came up with the idea of a group initiation, in which we would all initiate each other. These initiations were dramatic. On one occasion, a fearsome Baphomet kicked down the door of a deserted barn on Ilkley Moor, occasioning an inspiring level of shock on the part of the initiant who was tied up in the corner. On another occasion, the candidate was given a path to follow through woods and over meadows, on which he was accosted by various group members. My task was to wait for him, round my neck the skull of a dog with a light inside it, and offer him a tarot card with no explanation. Membership of that group varied from 8 to 14 over the next 3 years, after which the group began to fragment. This was the group that became known after its end as the Circle of Chaos. At the time, to us, it was just a group. I have some great memories of our workings. We usually worked at an outdoor site up in the hills between Morton and between East Morton and Ilkley Moor. We'd often spend all night at the site, coming home at dawn, occasionally in the fading light of a mushroom sacrament. Once we crossed the limb of a frozen lake, footsteps echoing across the ice, the cracks spreading out with this amazing sound. On another occasion, I saw the shimmering auras of trees for the first time, silhouetted against the dawn sky. One memorable night, we decided to walk on hot coals. Our thinking was, New Agers do this stuff, so it must be pretty easy. 6 of us achieved extraordinary states of consciousness by spinning in a circle for a while before stepping onto the 8-foot-long fire pit. No one got burned. A few years later, I turned up at the end of a similar experiment performed by a New Age guru in Austria under similar conditions that resulted in most of the group getting burned, feet, coals lodged between toes and so forth. I provided lavender oil as treatment, so we'd done a lot better than New Age wankers. A weird slant to that night was that it took place a couple of days after the Chernobyl nuclear reactor went rogue in 1985. Apparently the rain that came down that night as we walked back had hundreds of times the normal background level of radiation in it. We joked, next time we walk on hot plutonium. The most powerful work we did in that group was the creation of a conscious egregore. This was much more than just a servitor to provide us with ongoing magical services. This was something born in the fire of a group acid trip, in which we time travelled to the future, to where our future, magically perfected selves, would send this entity back in time. Len, Ray Sherwin's wife, was a gifted sculptor and made a statue about a foot tall, a gorgeous 3D visualisation of the Andrew David Tiamat monster that had been around the IOT since the beginning. That's my thing of it done on pencils over the original a photocopy of the Andrew David. The statue was painted silver, but I remember it glowing gold as the life force and consciousness flowed into it. The power of this entity was tremendous, more than any entity I'd ever encountered at that time. To give one example, a friend and magical co-worker, wrongly accused and persecuted by some bizarre obsession of the authorities, was advised by his lawyer to plead guilty. He rejected this advice and came to me to help him with some magical work, to take his case to Crown Court and get a full acquittal. I turned the egregore beast loose on the courtroom and instructed it to get my friend acquitted. I accompanied him into court to keep the critter powered up, and I shall never forget the happy, serene look on the judge's face as he made the summing up. Basically, he told the jury to ignore the probably dubious attestations of the police and extend their sympathy to the plight of my friend. He was acquitted, which flabbergasted both his lawyer and his barrister. The Circle of Chaos also gave rise to some highly significant events in the world of chaos magic. In August 1986, Chaos International was launched. The name was my suggestion. At the time, my girlfriend used to enjoy a posh fashion mag called Harper's and Queen International. So I thought it would be nice to end my yeah, most people don't know this. So I thought it would be nice to lend an ironical hint of that aristocratic glamour to the new magazine. Lionel Snell got the joke straight away. After issue 1, he wrote somewhere welcoming the sophisticated new magical magazine, quote, aimed at the readership of country life. End quote. That's the first Chaos International. P.D. Brown did the cartoon. He did some great cartoons. CI was conceived as a collective effort. It would be passed from one editor to the next. This worked up until issue 6, after which no one came forward to take it over anymore. leaving Ian Reid as the editor for the rest of its run to issue 23. Excuse me. It was put together from literal cut and paste. This is the era just before desktop publishing. Here's a sample. These are actually all physically pasted on. When I took Curzon's National over at issue 3, I thought, oh my God, I've only got a cranky old typewriter where half the keys don't make a proper impression. So I just sort of said to the universe, Curzon's National, I'm going to do it. Another thing though, instant magical working, and I was given £100 out of the blue, which I spent on an electronic typewriter. So I got nice even print, but of course you don't want something the size of ordinary nice even typescript for a magazine. You want something smaller. So what I had to do is I had to type on. I had to buy A3 paper, cut it down to a certain size, type everything onto that, go into a photocopying shop, photocopy it to 4/5 of its size, and then paste it up. So it was a bit fiddly before desktop publishing. Chaos International ran a few cartoons, such as this one, a satire at the expense of a certain Leeds occult supplier, Arthur Arvich. What exactly is an essential oil, Arthur? To put it exactly, my son, something we could not do without. We were still doing Thelema better than the OTO as well. Nobody before us had published Leah Hersig's diaries. Here's an excerpt from the diaries of Leah Hersig, Curzon's National 4. In April 1987, we created the Chaos Symposium in Leeds. This was chaired by Ray Sherwin and Mick Lyons, who was later to inspire the cartoon character Nick McMagus. So she was simple of the Illuminati. She was cosmic conflict demands a different vision for human destiny. Oh, aye? Fresh understanding of how we create our own realities. Oh, aye? The broadening of our whole being to experience oneness. Oh, aye? So what do you think? Puff! That was at the time. This is the chap who used to say there's only two types of magic: Puff's magic and guitar magic. The speakers at the symposium were Pete Carroll, Lionel Snell, Freya Aswin and myself. The hall was packed. Pete put his Principia Magica on the wall and did a talk on his new equations of magic, which I think I can honestly say left most people cold. Freya Aswin, dressed in dirndl, howled out runes. I remember Thurisaz in particular. I did a talk which asked what is magic for. Lionel, of course, charmed and amazed everyone with a talk that ranged through the Saturn-Uranus-Neptune conjunction in Capricorn, computer simulation of reality, the change in the micro-aeonic weather this could bring about, and the information universe. There was an after-party at Ray Sherwin's. This was a wonderful coming together of people who'd been working in the IoT but never met before. I met Ian Reid and Ingrid Fisher, who founded an IoT temple in London that year, and who became the backbone of the UK IoT, but we're getting ahead of ourselves there. At the party, Ian stood up and sang, which left us all with jaws on the floor. I hadn't heard such a thing since I went to a folk club at age 17. I think he sang a version of Trois Corbies, but I could be wrong. Ralph Tegmeyer was at the party with an Austrian journalist who interviewed me. This was the first I'd seen of the IoT in expanded European mode. The German-speaking parts of the IoT were about to become very significant. Tegmeyer had had these elegant, if rather expensive, chaospheres manufactured. The UK section bought one. It's kind of, I can't read that stuff, and very much down you can actually, unless you've got extraordinary eyes. But basically, I think it's 130 quid, 120 quid. It's a sort of nylon sphere, which is horrid, to put things in it, and these aluminium arrows. They're really very elegant, very nice. Pete Carroll and Ralph Tegmeyer, they jointly ran something called the Exercitium in 1986, a public seminar at Bonner-Ammersdorf in a former cloister in the Rhineland over 4 days in the October of that year. Those who passed certain tests were invited to a massive chaos in an abandoned ammunition dump dug deep into a mountain somewhere in the Rhineland, as people described it. This led to a decision to form a new magical order of some kind. The outcome was that the magical pact of the Illuminus of Natros was announced in a manifesto called the Pact, Liber Pactionis, published in Chaos International 3, August 1987. This new phase of the IOT, the Pact, came at around the time the Circle of Chaos was breaking up. Groups do break up, their raison d'etre running out, their work becoming stale. In the IOT we've come to recognise this, and while I might feel sad that a great group has come to an end, I know something better will arise soon. This kind of decay and reformation is a much better strategy than letting a group decline into a shell of its former self. In the group, the Circle of Chaos, we argued with Pete about the hierarchy issue. Our group was non-hierarchical, and the new pact embraced a scheme of grades. In fact, those grades were actually laid out in the original Liber Null right back in the first edition, but they were never taken seriously until the pact was formed. Anyway, Pete offered us grades in the new pact, but none of us in the group accepted at that stage. This illustrates how small the IOT was at that point. It's right, I'll mention that again a bit later. I ended up changing my mind about the hierarchy issue. There's a serious weakness in supposedly non-hierarchical groups. They generate covert as opposed to overt hierarchy. Those who are ready to speak the first tend to dominate proceedings. What's more, the IOT's hierarchy is tempered by the insubordinate system, in which a stream of criticism is generated from below towards every member who is in a leadership role. The Circle of Chaos group split up in late '87. That was the end of the second phase of the IOT in the UK. It was the end of the last of the old IOT groups. Everything that went on under the umbrella of the IOT from then on was the Pact. So the old IOT ceased to exist at the end of '87. For a couple of years I got on with my own magic and focused on getting a business in aromatics up and running. I was still living in Leeds, and in parallel to these developments there was a whole magical scene happening. It's probably the second biggest magical scene in the country after London, and in terms of activities and people, probably the centre of chaos magic at the time in the UK. One notorious person on that scene was Phil Hine. Before he joined the IOT, he released a radically different kind of book, the chain book, Equinox. And they say on the diverse practices of chaos magic from the Lincoln Order of Neuromancers.
You got him.
On receipt, please copy and pass on to anyone. No curses invoked if you do not choose to. Either way, we win. The idea was anybody could edit and distribute the book, like a pre-internet wiki, or like a playful bit of situationist agitprop. Phil used things from other publications, like this. There's the Black Gin Curse by Hakim Bey, which he nicked for Equinox. And he nicked it from Joel Barocco's Chaos Mag, chaos spelt normally but later spelt with a K. Another magazine that arose in the steamy jungle ecosystem of early chaos magic publishing. The first issue of Chaos, complete with letters from non-existent previous issues, was exciting, seeming to promise a brilliant fusion of chaos magic and situationist-style political protest. But unfortunately, Chaos did not uphold its early promise. It was descending into personal attacks on just about everyone, and then into pathetic whining. Phil's Apicausis had been a much more radical idea, basically, but of course hardly anybody ever mutated and reissued the book after its initial release, so it eventually solidified into a permanent web page. Meanwhile, in the German-speaking world, conflict was coming to a head. Ralph Tegmeyer was part of an existing network of magicians, members of the Fraternitas Saturni, Eugen Groscher's extraordinary magical order involving lashings of sex and mescaline, founded in the 1930s. His name may be familiar to you as author Frate
UD, or as it works in the unfortunate typography on the front of his very worthy Secrets of the German Sex Magicians, Frater VD. This existing network is no doubt one of the reasons why the IOT went into success overdrive in Germany and Austria in 1988 to 89. However, problems arose when Tegmayr, who was in charge of the German section of the IOT, came under the sway of a martial arts adept called Hermut. This was a man who could do remarkable things, such as throw people without being anywhere near them. A true master of energy magic. Apparently a man with a lot to teach, but only on his own terms. Everything was organised in authoritarian fashion. All but the most privileged acolytes lined up in tents on Helmut's lawn. Out of this, Ralph Tegmayr formed a magical curriculum called Ice Magic. This authoritarian magical style is what he wanted the future of the entire IOT to be like, apparently, and Pete Carroll rejected it completely. Matters came to a head in 1990 and has at and around the IoT World Meeting of that year. In the end, Tegmayr left, taking most of the IoT's German members with him. Pete Carroll gives his version of the so-called Ice War online. It's not hard to find if you want to read up about that. He was still undecided about his relationship with the IoT the following year, when he invited me to the IoT World Meeting at a castle in Austria called Burg Lockenhaus. I'd been away from active service in the IoT for over 3 years now, following the demise of the Circle of Chaos, and this is exactly what it took to get me back. Lockenhaus was so beautiful and had the requisite dark glamours. Die Blutgräfin, Elisabeth Bathory, who had bathed in the blood of virgins, had lived there. You could go up one of these staircases and there was a tiny bedroom, and it had got a big bed in it with a pentagram drawn on the end. And, you know, it's like the staircase went up clockwise, didn't it? All spiral staircases are anti-clockwise because everybody fought with swords in their right hand, so you're defending it from the top. This one went up clockwise, so this is for keeping someone in, not keeping them out. Not only that, but it was it had got Templar associations, and there was a Mithraic temple on the premises. I think it's this door here, actually. Who the Mithraists were in the Middle Ages there, who knows, but it had a hell of a vibe, that temple. It was haunted by a spirit which possessed one of our members. It took a few hours to evict the spirit from his body. It was quite a night. After the 10 days of the meeting, exhausted with more than a touch of Gnostic burnout, we returned to Vienna, where we witnessed what seemed to be further shots fired in the supposedly defunct ice war. My girlfriend and I were staying in the flat of one of the Austrian members with whom Pete was having a relationship. We got back there, showered off and got ready to go out for a meal. As we stepped out onto the lawn beneath a block of flats, into the blazing hot night of Vienna in the summer, we realised we were surrounded by lumps of ice, glinting in the streetlights. Maybe 20, 30 pounds of ice was scattered around in defiance of thermodynamic probability. Around that time, Pete realised he'd lost a valued talisman. Clearly the game was not over yet. I was truly inspired by my first IoT World Meeting. We returned to Leeds and immediately formed a working group, which turned into the first IoT temple outside of London. This was the third phase of the IoT for me, and represented a new stage for the order itself, because Pete had resigned as head that year, 1991, and other people had to step up and run it at an international level. Ian Reid and Ingrid Fisher, with some help from Nick Hall, were the new leaders of the UK section. I was to be the next. Up to the formation of the pact, the IoT was very small indeed, a loose network of maybe 20 people. This was about to change. The late 80s, early 90s saw the expansion of the IoT into new places overseas. In 1989, the USA section was formed. By 1992, this had gone into schism, and it was down to Ian Reid to go over there and sort it out. From this emerged the man who was to lead the US IOT for a few intense years up to his death in 1995, Bob Williams. Bob worked with a number of musicians, and one result of this was the CD, the pact, Flying in the Face. Our rituals were getting more ambitious in style, using audio more. Here's one I made in 1992, Gallifron Rite. This was basically frog marching people through the aeons. Come on, grow up, get with the fucking programme. That's the basic message of this. This early bit is all from, it was performed in an ordinary IoT temple, just 7 or 8 people, with a really crap dictaphone on the floor. So a really rough recording, and that was cut up and distorted and kind of mixed into this, so it was a layered working, where we're just developing power and power and power and having it into the audio. In this period, an Australian section was formed, Australasian section. Some of you might have heard of the infamous Temporal Nigri Solis, TNS, whose magic was rumoured to be so extreme that one of them had died as a result of working. This is not easily subject to verification. I never met anyone who'd met any of the original Australians. But their texts are still available online. Have a look for their journal Aftermath. Weirdly, having just checked and was writing this, I thought, I'll have another quick look for TNS. I know that they claim still to be going. Although it's a long time since they had anything to do with the IoT. We're talking over 20 years. The bottom line of the Temple Nigri Solis is that they got us our most famous member. One of my favourite IoT moments was in July 1993. We used to have this thing every year called UChaos, which is, a public thing, enforced talks or workshops. Sometimes an opportunity for people to do some workings then there in the hall. Quite a high energy event. I chaired it in 93, so I got handed things to announce, and I had the pleasure to announce that not only had William Burroughs joined the IoT, but he didn't mind who knew. Frater Dalfar 23 was an exemplary member. He never did what some famous and consequently short-lived members did, and treat the IoT grade system like a badge of achievement, which it is not. He refused to be rushed through the grades. He did all the work necessary for each grade he attained, and stylishly. Douglas Grant, another wonderful guy we've lost recently, died just a few weeks ago, reported to me how he and William had been charging sigils using a Colt 45 as part of William's M&M work. Doug was a good friend. He'd been running a nicely produced IoT magazine called Chaos Magic. In the first issue was a transcript of a video address William Burroughs had recorded for the World Meeting that year. I finally got to meet William at his house in Lawrence, Kansas in February 1996. The elegant old gentleman met us on the veranda of his one-storey home. We drank vodka and coke and smoked some of the strongest weed that has ever passed my lips, which did not stop William holding forth about all sorts of interesting topics. Sealed ecosystems, poisonous animals, and of course weapons. He unlocked a filing cabinet and showed us his gun collection. He handed me a Colt 45. Nice gun, but a little heavy in the hand. In 1995, there we are. That's Doug, and there's Stephanie, who's the widow of Bob Williams. Williams is so going for it. I mean, this guy's like 84 or something, and he's like, drunk a number of stiff vodka and cokes, which he called Russia Libras. And because the wall had only come down a few years before. And this weed was ridiculously strong. I had to be careful not to tilt my head back, or I'd just get lost, fascinated by the ceiling, like that. It was so strong. But it didn't put him off at all. Quite a chap. In 1995, we hosted the first IoT World Meeting in the UK. Some of you may remember Hawkwood College. I'm sure they'll never forget us. The public seminars were very successful. Here's the flyer. 42 hours of chaos magic. Everybody turned up except for Christopher Hyatt, who couldn't even be bothered to bloody tell us until the last minute. Enough about Christopher Hyatt. On the final night of the event, the people who ran Hawkwood College, which is a Steiner-centred school, complimented us on our respectful behaviour. Apparently, compared to us, previous weekends, trained accountants were total animals. Asked why I hadn't been upfront about our being chaos magicians. This led to a brief account of what chaos magic meant, at the end of which we burst into the song, My Old Man's a Magus. The sound of jaws dropping could be heard in Stroud. London, of course, has always had a big IOT scene. Don't expect details because it's still happening. In the mid-90s, we took on a major project under the direction of Frater Axis, a series of workings against AIDS. Many of the workings were done in gay clubs. We'd arrive and do a ritual before the clubbers arrived, leaving a sigil in flour on the dance floor, which the energy of the dancers would charge as they dispersed it. Then we would retreat for a few hours. At the climax of the night, when things were getting incredibly wild, I don't know if you've ever been to a really mad, druggy gay club, getting really wild on the dance floor, and the mantra of the IOT's healing servitor was mixed into the techno, our black-robed figures would appear briefly on the dance floor like a hallucination. Results started pouring in. Never again did the AIDS virus have such an easy time of it. I imagine we all know people who've been surviving and living with HIV for decades now, which wasn't expected at that time. And this is the audio we use mixed into the mad techno stuff. This is the IOT's healing service, which was released at this stage for general use. In 1998, we did a public working with the magical intention, have fun. A black mass to celebrate the life of Anton LaVey at London's Torture Garden Club. This is the flyer. It's an amazing night. We did a couple of other public events in the late 90s and noughties as well. There was the Erosinian Mysteries. And there's Colours of Chaos is more recent, it was only 5 years ago. By 1997, there were national sections of the IOT in Brazil and satrapies, which are smaller groupings in Holland, Denmark, Bulgaria, and other parts of the world. We're still opening temples in new places, Spain this year. So what does all this amount to? Does the IOT have a purpose, and has it achieved it? Pete Carroll outlines two purposes of the pact in his piece in Chaos International 3. Pact is a vehicle for the pursuit of the great work of magic and the pleasures and profits attendant on this quest. Pact also acts as a psychohistoric force in the battle for the ale. Whilst we might all have slightly different definitions of the great work of magic, it is surely obvious what the pleasures and profits attendant on that quest are. Ordinary sorcerers for the maintenance and improvement of your life. Love, wealth, healing, knowledge, prevailing in conflicts, and so on. But what about the psychohistoric force in the battle for the Aeon? Again, we might not agree which direction we want the Aeon to move in. However, within the IOT there seems to be a broad consensus about doing magics to improve the world, and one almost as broad as to which magics to do. Let's face it, anyone with one eye half open can see that the world needs to change. We do quite a lot of stuff to make the world a better place, as do other chaos magicians, such as those who work with Pete Carroll in Arcanorium College. Here's one from ages ago, the spell to expose the wrongdoings of a nasty bunch of bastards. There's a Canaan's rule embedded in that and a lot of other stuff. And here's a sigil to bring government surveillance into disrepute. That's been done in my own group, which I'm going to launch to a wider audience in the next few months. So anybody's interested, there's some cards here. I'll email you about it, some kind of like online public rituals. Back in the 1990s, Lionel Snell suggested doing outdoor rituals at popular sacred sites and other interesting places. And all you have to do to avoid harassment is to pretend to be a film team. I mean, these days that's so easy because everybody carries filming equipment, don't they? So this evolved into what we sometimes dignify with the dramatic name of Black Ops, where you do a working in full public view. One such involved 14 of us walking around York on Halloween in black robes, climbing up the 10th century Clifford's Tower to the bit you're not supposed to stand on, and standing there and singing Rungalda for a while, right in front of the tourists. At some points as we walked through the city centre, I got a very strong feeling that the only reason people weren't attacking us was the sheer size of our party. It takes an edge of danger to get the best results with Black Ops workings, and such danger is quite easy to come by when you're working in public. So, why am I still here? Why am I still here as the longest serving member of the IOT? I think the IOT is always going to be a relatively small organisation, smaller than the OTO, much smaller than the Freemasons. That's fine. What matters to us is that those who are meant to work with us can find us. Many of our members belong to other organisations too, some in leading roles. Many members come and go. They spend a few years mastering our magical curriculum, which I believe is still the best in terms of depth of training and general applicability. Then they leave. And other people join. So we're a bit like a university in that respect. I now have the rank of elder in the organisation, which means I've passed through the grades and I'm now once more an ordinary member, with all the duties and privileges that entails, but with no explicit organisational responsibilities. Which kind of means that a whole area of my magical life has now fused seamlessly with the IOT. I care a lot about the organisation and its members, and I love the magic we do. So to continue the university analogy, I guess you could say I'm lifetime staff. And that's all I've got to say in a formal sense. I put up a very brief timeline, which might generate a few more questions and ideas, but that's the talk as such.
Thank you. Are you happy to perch on your stool and we can make sure that the camera reaches you? And I don't want to block this amazing timeline. Can we have the light, the other light? Thank you. Perfect. Lovely to see you all. Traditionally, I ask the first question, which I shall do tonight, and that's to give you a few moments to gather your thoughts and ask your question, get your questions ready in your head. The way we do them is I will ask you to wave a hand at me, and then I'll sort of point at you, and that gives us an idea of how many questions are waiting at any given point. So, first of all, thank you so much for that. That was really lovely, and I love the anecdotes, and I love the overview, and thank you so much for all the illustrations. Weren't they great? My question really comes out of my main observation of chaos magic is constantly renewing creativity. I mean, I moved to London in 1989, and it's not the path I'm drawn to, but if you live in London, you know chaos magicians, certainly from 1989 through the 90s. It was so vibrant. And I guess that must have been, my question is to do the transition and the environment, which you touched on, wherein you had some remarkable techniques from Zulema, and remarkable techniques and Kabbalistic structures from Golden Dawn and so forth. And was it your age? Was it where you were that somehow that you were just so creative with all of you, and you tried new stuff and you weren't afraid to try new stuff? So my question is, what are your thoughts on that? There were so many taboos. You mustn't do this, dark side of the tree. Who helped you You were created even in the face of Kenneth Grant. I mean, you went. Yes, Spare was created, Grant was created, but there's something about the immediacy of the creativity that I've always noticed about chaos magicians.
I think the key to the flexibility of chaos magic is that it's got a very small theoretical base.
Okay.
There's two things. I mean, according to, as I understand it, I mean, some people, particularly sort of people who've come into chaos magic in recent, in the last decade or two, who've not really been there for the whole history. Oh, you can't. They say things online. Oh, you can't define chaos magic. You can't say what it is. That's bollocks. It's very simple, actually. There's two principles to it. One of them is that the main one, the really core one, is that magic is what has not previously been recognised about magic is its degree of dependency on what you believe. In other words, belief in itself is a technology. This puts chaos magic firmly at the absolute opposite side of the circle from religion, where belief is faith. In chaos magic, belief is a technique. You simply decide to believe something for 20 minutes or a week or a month, or as long as it takes you to achieve what you need to believe it. And there's embedded levels of belief. So if you start off a ritual, then you have to obviously believe that you're a magician. In other words, that magic is possible and you're personally are capable of doing it. And then as you change your clothes and get into the temple or the wood or whatever, you then have to believe that you are an Egyptian priest, stroke druid, stroke Vitki, stroke whatever else floats your boat. And that's the important thing. It's the use of belief to generate a sense that you know something's going to happen. The other principle, which Pete Carroll came up with in the early chaos magic writings, is gnosis, which most people call ASC, altered state of consciousness. I don't like the word altered, because altered from what? Are we in a single state of consciousness? I've never been in any particular single. I don't have a ground state of consciousness. I don't know what one is. Everything is altered. Some call it an extraordinary state of consciousness, some gnosis or ESC. And Alan Chapman has taken this actually a step forward further, just to sort of do a bit more theory. So we don't really need the gnosis bit, unless you find it difficult to change belief. But the core is belief, and I would basically agree. The core of magic is what you believe is going to happen, what you believe is possible, what you believe about the world. So the theoretical base of chaos magic is so small, it's really portable. You can stick it in your pocket and carry it with you, and then on top of that, if you train yourself to be able to resist the worst shifts of your consciousness, the way that human consciousness is basically chaotic anyway. It very easily falls into all sorts of. We generally just splurge along, going off in all sorts of directions, except where we're disciplined into work or some other disciplined function. But if you, I'm not quite sure. Actually, I've run out of the point now.
Okay.
Come back to the main point. Yeah, it's very portable. So whatever state you're in, once you've trained yourself and you know that you can impose your reality on your own consciousness because you trained yourself to do so, then the whole thing is so portable. You don't need much else. That is why.
So it's not a huge leap to say, let's do something for AIDS in a club.
You don't need a great big thick book that tells you what to dress in and what ornaments to use and what incenses to use and everything. You make it all up on the spot because there are very few principles.
Wonderful. Super. Questions from you? Hands, please. No, we're not all stunned in silence, we're just having a quiet moment.
Observation rather than question.
Sure.
Very close to Robert Anton Wilson's perspective of reality.
Very close to
Robert Anton Wilson's idea of reality tunnels, and also that magic is essentially a form of acting.
And
magic is a form of acting.
Yes.
Theatre.
Yeah.
A lot of the props we use and the rituals we use are theatre for the mind to distract the consciousness from a lusty result and so forth.
The thing about acting, about faking it till you make it, it's not. Normally we tend to think of ourselves as a hierarchy. My consciousness decides something, there it makes me go and do something. and my body then goes and does something. But in fact, of course, we're constantly influenced by what we're already doing. It works both ways. And I thought our beliefs are likely to be a result of our actions as much as our actions are likely to be a result of our beliefs. Therefore, if you act in a certain way for long enough, you'll start to believe you are that. So the fake it till you make it thing works like method acting. Yeah. Robert Anton Wilson, definitely one of the great influences. I mean, IoT was announced in 1978. I mean, Illuminatus had just come out, 1976, I think. Robert Anton Wilson had sort of branched off from Thelema himself and decided to, critique magic from a slightly different angle. The Illuminati books, I mean, God, that's got to have been an influence on the name of the IoT, sure. As well as things like, if you read books of that era, the 60s and 70s, you can pick up all the influences of the IoT. The Sigil of Chaos, obviously, originally from, most proximately from Michael Moorcock, but of course he took it from lots of previous things, so that's the most.
Where did he take it from?
Well, there's eight raid things going right through loads of stuff, isn't there? The most obviously chaos-like one is the Petro Veve in Voodoo, which is the Veve of the crossroads and the crossroads with the crossroads.
Right.
So it's the place of the dispersion of all energies and the arrival of all energies. And of course there's the Hindu eight-raid wheel, with all different cycles of life, all different layers of being and all of that. So these 8 raid things are, there's loads of them.
Moorcock does sort of cock to, like designing it for the shield of Prince Gain of the Damned, his character. It was the shield boss. And he does kind of go, yeah, I came up with that.
Yeah, so there's all these influences. I mean, Arkham are all secret societies. You can read stuff from there. That's obviously an influence. Sort of.
Why are most magicians skint? As far as I know, empty pockets is a common thing with wizards.
It's not
I'm just wondering. No, but the thing is, wealth isn't important. But it depends on how you define wealth. But you wrote a book on wealth magic, and I'm wondering whether some people conjure for wealth, but and maybe they get it wrong because they're conjuring for money, whereas they should be conjuring maybe for what they want, they would like to have via money. So, is there a difficulty with this kind of?
It's a really good question, actually. I think that is a really deep question. I am paradigmatic in this regard because I was skint most of my life, and I managed to sort of gradually manoeuvre myself into a fairly, comfortable kind of level of income. And I think basically magicians are people who don't want to do the normal thing. And so it makes it quite difficult to... And frankly, the only people I know who've made loads of money are people who've managed to get themselves obsessed with it. And I'm obsessed with money. It's a bit like getting obsessed with dog vomit or something, isn't it? It's just so below one's dignity to become obsessed with money, don't you think? I mean, in other words, what I'm saying is that the only function of money, as far as I'm concerned, a magician needs just enough money to do his will. The rest of it's bollocks. The idea of getting really rich through magic is just stupid. It just means that you're not, you just, if you want to live your life in full rapturous appreciation of the fact you're alive, then being obsessed with money will really get in your way. So just get enough for what you need. But of course there are people who really ought to work a bit harder at it, perhaps.
Fantastic. Darren, here's the next question, then Tom.
A very simple question, because I did my dictate at Leeds, and I will always remember it with affection, and also its high standards in the university there. But what is it that is so special for this particular course?
Sorry, I'm a little bit deaf. What was the...
Leeds.
I got the latter bit, and I didn't get the first bit.
What is it about Leeds that
Leeds,
is such a basis and so on for this kind of calling?
I know what you mean. I think its immense influence on the magical scene is a lot of it's down to the Sorcerer's Apprentice, as much as I hate to admit that, because in some ways it's quite a tacky business, but it did provide a focus for people, a meeting place, and so it was very catalytic.
Do you think
just going to say that in the general area like Durham and so on, there's, you know, equally highly respected universities. There's quite a few around there, but Leeds seems to make the impact if you're calling on it. I mean, I couldn't imagine Durham, the University of Durham, or even York, somehow getting involved in
No, I know what you mean.
There is something, maybe it's a form of rebellion there, or something, a positive rebellion in Leeds that tends to bring this out.
I mean, Leeds is, and this city I live in now, which I've had more to do with in total than Leeds, is Sheffield. And I mean, it's only 30 miles from Leeds, and it's almost the same size, and it's got a lot of the same history. You know, it's a sort of small town that became an industrial centre. And it's got nothing like the same chaos magic thing going as Leeds. Mind you, Leeds hasn't now. Leeds has just fallen back into... When I... somebody said, oh, why don't you do a talk for... It's a friend of mine who knows people in Leeds. So why don't you do a talk for Leeds University Pagan Society? I said, yeah, sure, right. We can be talking. It's not far away. So I start getting in contact with them and we do the old emails. They're such a bunch of... I mean, they couldn't organise a piss-up in those people. I just gave up on them completely, and it's just useless. That's what Leeds has become. For a while it was amazing, but it's lost a little right now.
Aeons. Tom, at the back.
Just picking up on something you touched on towards the end, you said you're seeing more and more that there's...
Yeah, can you yell at me, please? I can't hear a thing.
Just picking up on something you touched on towards the end, you mentioned that more and more online you get people who come in with a very, very fixed, almost dogmatic idea of what chaos magic is or should be. Is that something you're finding recruiting when you get people doing the initiation process or going through the grades?
Not really, no. I think anybody who turns up to join the IOT knows that everything you believe about magic is disposable. It's just, you know, it's just a Kleenex you can throw away. That's all it is. And belief is just, you know, sweets or pound coins or Kleenex. It's nothing. It's disposable stuff. So any idea, if anybody comes to the IOT to go through our process, then by the time they've got through the first few emails and letters, they probably realise that that's the case. If they're clinging on to any particular ideas about magic, then they might better be prepared to treat them a bit more lightly, if not actually let go of them. I think everybody who's been through the IOT knows that.
You, and then in the corner, first you, huh?
Hi. Those 10 days in that castle, when you went to that international chaos meeting, can you talk a bit more about why it was so inspiring for you?
Why it was so
inspiring?
Well, it was the meeting that was really inspiring, but the fact that it was held in such a beautiful place.
Yeah, or just why the meeting was inspiring as well.
Okay, well, this was an extraordinarily long meeting. We haven't had any as long as that since. It was 10 days. There was 4 days of public meeting, and then a day's break, and then 5 days of IOT, or maybe it was the other way around, 5, then break, then 4, something like that. So it was a real Gnostic marathon. And if you've been, you know, by will changing your state of consciousness 3 or 4 times a day for 10 days, you will end up, you know, pretty spaced out and rather impressed with what you can do. I've never been to a situation before where there was so many people with such a gung-ho enthusiasm for some real bloody magic, you know. There's just absolutely nothing indecisive or wimpy or crap about it. It was wonderful.
Cool. Thank you. And in the corner, hi.
I found your photos of burrows particularly fascinating. Do you know, or are you willing to say, how far through the syllabus you got, or any of the workings he was involved in were?
So you find the Burroughs connection fascinating, and then what's the...
How far did he go? How far did he go in the grades?
He only went up to third. To third. We have, you know, we go backwards. You know, so you start as a novice, then you go fourth, then you go third, second, first. First are the international coordinators. The second are national coordinators. The thirds are the backbone of the organisation. They're the people that can do anything they want. They can organise temples. They can organise local meetings. If they want to do anything at international level, they have to get sponsorship. Fourths are people that have done their 6 months Libre MMM. And so he'll have done his 6 months Libre MMM, then he'll have done his year kind of apprenticeship as a third, making sure you've got a really wide spectrum of magical experience. Now you've done plenty of divination, enchantment, dream work, all of the basic stuff. And he went as far as third, and he produced some of the stuff he showed me was artworks that had come out of that, like for instance, things he'd shot at and then painted around the holes and stuff. And things he used other sort of aleatoric type techniques where he'd just spoil a piece of paper in some way, and maybe just by splattering it with stuff, and then in some altered state find little entities that lived in the splatter and elaborate them. And that was his art in his last few years. And I think that was mainly what he was doing magically. Although, of course, he did do actual spells. One spell, I remember, he did. You remember that disgusting bunch of creeps, the Westboro Baptist Church? There's some horrible, nasty pervert called Fred Phelps, who's now dead, but he's infected a few dozen people with his insanity. I thought they still exist. When he first, I think it's about 1993, it was not long after he was in the organisation, he called for a world working against Phelps because, what was the exact situation? It was, I'm trying to think of the name of the author now. It's a gay author, and she'd come to speak at some town not far from where William was living, and the Phelps Brigade tow rags turned out, and they were basically, it was wonderful. Apparently, according to William, they were chased away by everybody in the crowd. They were run out of town, I think was his words. So yeah, we did do a few workings that were coordinated by him. I remember doing a sort of action painting type sigil and sending it to him and things. But I don't know any more detail. If you look at the last of his books that was published under his name shortly after his death, which was August '97, there's a book called Last Words, and it's in his diaries from there. There's a couple of mentions of the IOT, and Doug and Stephanie were in that picture, in that, but not much detail.
Oh, thank you. Hi. Two more at the second row, and then you again. Hi. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Dave, when you're talking about the way that magical groups kind of they develop and then they get to a point where they then fall apart and so on and so forth, and that, obviously that's a natural, organic thing. What happens in nature? Obviously, species arise and then go extinct and so on and so forth. Do you think it's possible to organise a magical group in such a way as to, as it were, have a sort of inbuilt self-destruct mechanism to prevent it becoming institutionalised in the way that religions and political groups almost always do, and become completely divorced from their original purpose?
I'm sure it is actually. It'd probably be a good idea if you thought that was a danger. I've never actually really thought that was a danger. Basically, once people are bored, once people start leaving a group, and it's kind of like, they won't admit they're bored, but it's quite obvious that people are beginning to get a bit bored with the way the group's going, and it's time to just blow it up. And then, so that's tended to happen a number of times. And I think there's a really good reason for that. It's because people are evolving. People are developing. If all the groups stay the same, it would show that nobody in them had changed, I think, which is a bit sad.
So you think
magic, it's got to change, hasn't it?
So you think basically as part of this sort of general culture of chaos magic generally, people do tend to just not continue in a group if they get bored with it, it's kind of past the sell-by date, as it were. They're affinity groups. They're groups that people want to be together and they want to work magic together. So what anarchists would call an affinity group. Mm-hmm. So they've got the dynamics of an affinity group, which is that it's purely the collective will of the people that keeps it together. Once that starts to decay, you might as well just forget it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Paul.
Did the comic artist Grant Morrison, did he make the acquaintance of your group? And also my second part of the question is, how do you think, has he managed to spread this the virus of chaos magic in his work?
Yes, he invented a magical phrase, the hypersigil, which people are still using back in the late 90s. When I published the first edition, I self-published Chaotopia in 97. I made a little sort of press release handouty type thing on the computer and sent it to a few places that I was trying to sell the book through. And I thought, Grant Morrison, I've been reading The Invisibles. I bet he's into chaos magic, or I bet at least he'd appreciate it. Well, he wasn't, out about chaos magic at the time. So, not that I was aware of. So I sent a copy of this little flyer thing with a cover note, for a polite cover note to his publisher in New York, which was Vertigo, wasn't it? DC Vertigo at the time, I think. And 2 weeks later, I was just briefly passing through my flat on the way from one job to the next. I was at work and I sort of come home and I'm about to go out again, just sitting around with a bite to eat. And the phone rings and it's Grant Morrison, ringing from Glasgow saying, "Oh, I've already got a copy of your book. I really enjoyed it." So that was really gratifying. Then I met him about a year later when my girlfriend at the time was a musician and she was doing the music for one of his events in London. So I actually got to meet him. Yeah, nice guy.
He's just been announced editor of Heavy Metal magazine.
Yes, yes, that looks fun.
I mean, his I hesitate to use the word ego, but his personality is right up there on the front.
Oh, he's got a massive ego. A lot of really good creative people have, haven't they? At least he doesn't slag everybody off like Alan Moore does. I mean, Alan Moore is another comic writer.
Have you not read the
I really like some of the stuff he says about magic, and I really like his take on magic, but he's just got this arrogant attitude. Only he knows the truth about magic. It pisses me off.
The pair of those guys are like the prog rock and the punk rock of magic. And the friction between them. Alan's very kind of Victorian theatrical, and Grant's the punk rock upstart. But there's no love lost between those two. There's a very, very deep antipathy. And it's very public, very venomous.
Yeah, between those guys. Yeah. So I gathered. Yeah.
Super. Gosh. Well, we always promise to wind up a little bit before 9, but do not fret. We're all here for a while, including Dave. He'll tell us when he needs to dash for his train to Sheffield. Just a few concluding remarks. Dave mentioned Chaotopia. He's also written Right from the Well, which I just read recently. I really love it. I really love it. And it's so creative. Anyway, we have copies of both. Dave has kindly agreed to sign copies, so if you'd like a signed copy, please feel free. We also have, the bar is open, the soft drinks are complimentary, the bookshop is open, Dave is here for a while, and tonight has been brought to you by me. I'm Christina Treadwells. If you get emails, I'm that face attached to that name. And my colleagues who are Marco Visconti, Mary Ademoye, Liga, and Tom Stevenson. So there's 4 of us who make it possible, even though there's just one of us standing at the front. But be assured, like the folks on the bar and on the till, we're all here to help you have a nice time. You have a wine glass at your feet. Don't pick it up yet, but best to pick it up before you go rather than step on it. The most important thing, I want to say a special thank you today. Thank you so much for coming. Please join me. Wasn't that amazing? Was that not amazing? Can we do that again? Because that was just incredible. Let's do that.
Small announcement, there's no cars here, and also if anybody wants to, like I say, I'm building up this series of online workings which are open to anybody who likes to do weird magic. So if you want, stick your email address on this piece of paper and grab a card if you're interested in that.
Wonderful. So, and we have books upstairs and also have copies of your card upstairs. We hope to meet you over a glass of wine. If you have to run away, thank you for coming, but we hope you can stick around. We're all here. There's a lot of work.